Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. Are you sick of hearing the term fascism thrown around to an extent where you feel like it has no meaning anymore? What does it even mean anyways? Don't worry, I feel your pain. In fact, fascism doesn't really have a real definition, and it's more defined by what it looks like than what it says. With that being said, I thought we would check out a very popular video that is titled, "What is Fascism?" So this video has nearly 1.5 million views, and it's by a channel called Horses. So I'm interested to see what they have here and to be able to add as much as I can. All right, this video is going to be linked down below. Please check it out. Give it a view, like, and sub to their channel. And with that, let's get started. All right, I just noticed with wearing all black here, I feel like I've now become one of Mussolini's black shirts. That was not my intention, though. Let's see what we got.
Fascism is immensely dangerous, but fascism is also probably the most egregiously and frequently misused word in political discourse. Certainly in America.
It's true.
Anyway.
I mean, yeah, you hear it thrown around it where it's just become when people do bad. That's fascism.
This combination is a huge problem. I'll get more into that later, but for now, I believe it is irresponsible and cheap to recklessly throw this word around as a partisan attack or a sensational headline.
Musa spaghetti.
Instead, we should strive to understand history's most violently destructive political ideology, and we should learn to identify fascism in an accurate, honest way.
Would you agree that he says it's the most dangerous of ideologies? Again, a term that gets thrown around a lot. You hear like socialism thrown around a lot, and it's been diluted to the point where it's like when the government does stuff, right? People love throwing it around because so many of these things and these terms will have inherently negative connotations to certain people that you can use that and not really have to define it, but still convey some type of communication without really communicating anything. Does that make sense?
Only then can we realistically keep fascism out of our modern systems of governance.
All right.
So with all that said, let's get started.
Let's see what we got. Fascism.
You're looking for a really quick, effective...
What did I say? Difficult to what? Difficult to define. Yeah, for sure.
If you're
It's probably of all the isms that you would get thrown around in the 20th century, maybe the hardest to define, right? There's a lot of forms of other ideologies, types of socialism, you know, stuff like that. But like fascism, are there different types of fascism? That's something that's even harder to define.
Really quick, effective definition of fascism. That's too bad. Such a thing simply does not exist. Fascism cannot be holistically summarized by one-sentence quips or turns of phrases. Roger Griffin is perhaps the historian who is accepted to have gotten the closest, saying, "Fascism is a genus of political ideology whose mythic core in its various permutations is a palingenetic form of populist ultra-nationalism."
Okay. And that right there is just so small. Ultra-nationalism. Almost all nationalism is populist anyways, by appealing to the common majority of people. So right there, that's hard because there's a lot of nationalistic things. Like just being nationalistic, does that make you fascist? Well, no, right? There's so many more things that have got to be added to it, right?
Palingenetic here as in the rebirth of a nation, a revolution. Although elegant and accurate, Griffin's definition is a simplification that isn't functionally very useful.
Yeah.
This definition alone doesn't make it any easier to pick out a fascist regime. A succinct definition of fascism has indeed eluded historians for decades, for a lot of reasons.
And it's problematic too because it's also new in a lot of ways of where that term is actually being used, right? Like so much of it goes back to Benito Mussolini, which is not that long ago, right? Fascism is also disagreed upon on like what spectrum between left and right. I've heard people say it's an extreme, you know, right ideology. I've heard people say it's an extreme centrist ideology, right? Like can't even hit it on the spectrum, like the political compass, if you will. Hard to do that, see that consistently.
People will often begin this conversation with the etymology of the word fascism. It is derived from an Italian word for a bundle of sticks.
Yep.
Then you could say that one stick is easily broken, whereas a bundle are stronger when united.
It's a Roman symbol, right? I show this in my class when we talk about this. The idea of the bundle of sticks together makes it stronger. Even though like you look at that axe tool, it looks almost unusable. But it's that strength kind of in unity. But by the way, going back to what I was saying about like the political compass, yeah, I've seen fascism fall in like far right. I've seen people say it's far left. I've seen people say it's extreme centrist. And some people are like extreme centrist, like authoritarian centrist. It's so interesting. People use it to their own, to mean whatever they want it to mean, huh?
This strength and unity accurately describes fascism, yes, but it also accurately describes a huge number of other political systems that have existed throughout history.
Sure.
In fact, you could argue that the point of all political systems is to create strength through unity. So this discussion doesn't really do much for us. Another thing we should not do is define a political movement by the particulars of its incarnations. In this video, I will give examples of fascism being applied in real life.
Like you have to look exactly like Nazi Germany did to be fascist, right? Or Mussolini in Italy.
Not say, because Mussolini wrote X, Y, and Z, fascism as a whole means X, Y, and Z. Just like America's Electoral College does not define democracy, the methodologies used by specific fascist regimes do not define fascism. Instead, we need to look at what, ideologically and functionally, these regimes have in common.
And I think him saying like functionally is the thing that I've really kind of come to, and for the academic sense, how to communicate it is you look at how it functions, not necessarily like what it says, because there isn't really a what it says. You know what I mean? Because it's not, it's like a figment almost.
This generic version of fascism, though, only exists as an abstract concept. The term is not intended to be an ironclad box, but rather a framework under which to further analyze individual political movements. For example, Nazism was quite different from Italian fascism.
Yeah, you can see like when people will talk about this is where I was saying like some people will say it's like a far left thing because the Nazis were called National Socialists. But then if you have political literacy, you would see things like the term national and socialism is basically an oxymoron. That socialism by definition is not national, right? If you're looking at it from a Marxian perspective, it's international, right? But like national socialism, right? So yeah, it's hard to even conflate like fascism can be a different thing to different people, and it can look different in Germany versus Italy, especially when it comes to things like I wonder if we'll be talking about like racism, where it didn't have the same type of like racism, although you might have xenophobia or something like that, but not have like the anti-Semitism that you saw as strong in Germany as you're going to see with fascist Italy.
Both generically fascist.
I'm talking too much.
Extreme nationalism is the core tenet of fascism, which inherently makes the word difficult to define. Each nation has its own values, identity, and cultural idiosyncrasies. An English fascist utopia would look very different from a Mexican fascist utopia. By contrast, something like democracy does not inherently lean into national identity, so it manifests similarly wherever it is implemented. Fascism by its nature is different everywhere it appears. There's also no universe.
I mean, again, you can make that same argument. Democracy looks different no matter where it is. Socialism looks different no matter where it is. So why are we giving fascism like a pass to not need to be defined? What I'm hoping to come out of this video is he's saying the things that I have learned about fascism. Nothing really new yet as far as like, okay, you know, the way it's not defined, right? I'm hoping to see, hopefully here, a little bit more of him maybe making a take on what he thinks really fascism's kind of definition is. What we're seeing right here is kind of the classical one, which I don't know if you consider it like a cop-out to just not say that it has a definition, but just like throw up some different examples of what we think fascism might be. I'm hoping we could come to something, and I don't know if we ever will, as far as a consolidation of what the political theory is of fascism.
End goal for fascist regimes. Marxists work towards a classless society. Right. Anarchists work towards a stateless society. There is no single.
Well, so do communists. Objective. Communists, I mean, we're already getting into definitions there. Communism, like I guess you could say anarchy, because there's certain types of communism. There's an anarcho communism, which is a core belief, meaning moneyless, stateless, and classless.
Of a fascist regime, other than the vague, emotionally charged idea of a nation's greatness. More than a single practical objective, fascist movements are decidedly
convertible
negative.
Limo.
By this, I mean fascism specifically espouses what it hates. Few movements are as purely negative as fascism, which claims to be anti-individualist, anti-liberal, anti-conservative, anti-democratic, anti-Marxist,
It's anti-everything.
Anti-capitalist.
It's whatever it is. Fascism is when you hate everything.
But fascist ideology is not so specific about what it supports, and in practice, fascist movements have acted in disagreement with these aforementioned antis.
Now, we'll say, though, that there are things when you look at classical definitions of what are commonalities amongst fascism, and I want to see if he's going to bring those in, and I'll try to interject what has generally been communicated when it comes to what are the similarities amongst fascist states.
Even further muddies the water. Fascism is really a set of philosophies and methods, and these things also appear in a bunch of other non-fascist systems of governance.
Okay.
So it's easy to see something that is present in fascist regimes and then assign that thing itself
That
as
makes
the
sense.
definition of fascism.
That makes sense why you see it thrown
For
around
example,
so much.
if a political party is trying to silence their opposition, that alone...
By the way, I've seen it's the Mussolini thing there. You would see it on buildings, and like I saw this building that had this with like a big 3D model of like his face. So creepy. It looks so like dystopian.
does not make them fascists, despite that being a tool used by fascists.
It could be something similar.
Now, with all that
fascists
said,
believe.
we can still identify fascism. Fascist regimes, whether they came to power or not, have things in common. We can
The
break
black
down
shirts.
the ideology
I didn't mean
of
to do that.
fascism in a meaningful way. It just takes some
The
patience.
fascism's when you march funny. It's when you march in funny lines.
In his book, Fascism, Comparison and Definition, historian Stanley G. Payne offers this table to explain fascism. More than any single sentence or definition, this table effectively communicates what fascism is. Again, though, this is not a hardline, ironclad definition, but rather it provides a framework for a generic idea of fascism. Fascism is built on an idealistic, almost utopian approach to extreme nationalism. Fascism says with this philosophy alone, a society can build itself into a great nation, in charge of its own destiny and united by the blood of its people.
That's interesting because he used that term utopia, which is something that communism also states of creating utopia. But it's like, I guess the difference is, what does that utopia look like for a communist, moneyless, stateless, classless society? But fascism, it's probably going to be the opposite. It's I mean, not classless, but a division of class, all centered around a specific people, not an international thing, but a specific type of people where everything else has been cleansed out and it's one type of people in one place.
This extreme sense of national greatness is the heartbeat of fascism. Fascism promises to create a new culture and a new nation which is capable of achieving greatness in ways that previous
I like the
societies
style of the video
simply
here,
could
though,
not.
like
Does not promise improvement,
the
but
graphics
instead
and everything.
a whole new paradigm of existence for a nation. Fascism further seeks to radically change a nation's relationship with other nations.
True.
This could come in the form of imperialist expansion, but it does not have to. Within fascist framework, this great new nation operates under an authoritarian state, which is not based on any preceding models or government structures. The people must submit to the party. Economically, fascism rejects the Marxist ideas of a classless society.
Right.
Instead, it places value on the elite class, but looks to replace
A lot of people
former
don't understand that difference. The whole definition there of a classless society. Fascists, ultranationalists definitely believe in a superiority of classes of that. It could be racial, economic, whatever.
society. Instead, it places value on the elite class, but looks to replace former democratic thinking elites with its own set of decision makers. Fascist economies are multi-class and highly regulated, though may exist under several categorizations. There's no unifying economic system that can be assigned to all fascist regimes. Fascists express a positive opinion of violence and a willingness to engage in
Glorification of
violence and war.
It's the glorification of it too, that it is a tool for improvement, glorification of violence for a noble cause, right? And that revolutionary attitude is similar to many ideologies, not just fascist. Okay, there's a lot of revolutions that aren't fascist.
Aside from the belief in
fact,
violence
most
to
are.
enact the will of the state,
A lot of them are the
fascists
opposite.
see violence in itself as therapeutic. They believe violent Darwinian struggle, wherein only the strong survive, is necessary to the continuing of a successful nation. These together form the core ideology behind generic fascism. And next, as Payne does in his work, we can look at the methods fascists use to achieve these goals.
Again, I love the graphic style he's using. This makes it look like it's, very dated, like a vintage film here, talking about fascism, maybe when it was closer to its height. I really like the style choice here.
Fascism provides ways to organize and execute its plans. Again, taken individually, these methods can be found in other non-fascist regimes, but collectively, they make up the generic fascist methodology. The first is mass mobilization. Fascists are not interested in controlling a small sector of elites like many other political movements are. Instead, fascists seek to revolutionize society from the bottom up by mobilizing the masses towards their own common goal.
Now, would you think that, and this is where, again, you can say that, like, if you see one of these things, it doesn't mean it's fascist, because that isn't necessarily going to be unique to fascism of trying to do this ground up thing. Look at, like, the Cultural Revolution in China under Mao. That was a bottom up consolidation of people and their thoughts.
He himself famously said, "Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the nation." Fascism looks to sweep people into a frenzy. Fascism exalts a leader as a messiah in a way that intentionally mirrors religious experiences. The state intends to replace traditional religion with a secular, civic religion. The state is the religion. To do this, the state creates a series of myths that unify the fascist elites and the people over which they rule.
It's kind of like using myths to create a sense of tribalism, to get people unified, that you all come from some mythological background. Try to find as many ways to unify the people that you want to be unified. Maybe with like the Aryan mythology, that, predates the Nazis by a lot, but was through, German culture there, part of this mythological race almost.
Most famously, these myths have been rooted in anti-Semitism and racism, but they don't always have to be. This civic religion,
they create an out-group, though, an in-group and an out-group,
become the driving force of existence for the people. It diminishes or entirely destroys the role of actual supernatural-based religious principles. To help create this civic religion, fascists emphasize the use of aesthetics.
You saw communists do this too.
Architecture and design. This is to elicit an intense emotional response in the same way that religious
oh my gosh. Dude, like the fascist like ceremonies and this kind of stuff is so scary looking. And same with fascist art. Like you saw that Mussolini stuff. It's so scary to me. There's nothing like inspirational or beautiful about it. You know what I mean?
It's scary. Have. All mass movements have their own symbols, but fascism places an obsessive emphasis on visually distinct things and events like marches, ceremonies, meetings, and symbology. The idea here is to build a mystique that fully envelops participants, creating not just a political movement, but a spiritual movement. Again, the state is the religion. True fascist regimes are made up of men and pay almost no attention to women's rights or gender equality.
It does seem to be, we see misogynist, very misogynist there. It's that whole idea of, again, inequality of people, or it's like the opposite of like communism, where it's very divisive. You have men have the superior roles, right? Women have their role, and you stick to that. And there's strength in being that alpha male,
Fascism obsesses with the perceived strength of the male gender. This likely stems from fascism's need for constant struggle, for unending revolution and violence. The fascist notion is that men are the predominant force in society, and women naturally take a subservient
and some of them look so
place.
Not manly.
More broadly, fascism also espouses that these sectors of a society, men, women, children, etc., define and limit the rights of those individuals. Because fascism is inherently revolutionary and seeks to provide nations a rebirth, youth is specifically exalted over members of older generations. In a literal sense, the youth are the future of a nation. But the daring, action-taking sensibilities of a fascist revolution appeal to the youth in a way that can be less interesting to older, more pragmatic people. There is also authoritarian command. All movements rely on charismatic leaders, but fascism is unique in that it combines populism with elitism. Fascism looks to appeal to the masses.
So it's like of combining populism with elitism. That's interesting. So what I come away with that is the majority. You teach the majority that they are elite, which separates you very distinctively from the minority groups among you. So it's not a small group of people that are elite, it's most of you. And that's a message that you could think would have a lot more success than saying you're the small group and then there's the big group you're going against.
Entire people of the nation, while also emphasizing the role of an elite messianic figure. Fascism leans into the function of this leadership rather than party lines or specific procedural doctrines. This leadership figure may be elected, but the participants of fascism must ultimately subordinate.
That was the one I was talking about, this thing. I think that face is like three-dimensional, and I wonder if this is their headquarters, but it's like, dude, fascist art is just creepy.
To him. Alongside this, fascism dictates that leaders should militarize government institutions.
Okay.
Goal here being a party militia, one military force that represents,
it is militaristic,
and executes the will of the party.
Glorification of the military.
This militia also serves in the aesthetic function of fascism. It is part of everyday life in a fascist regime. Together, these are the methodologies behind fascist movements. And so now we have a functioning framework and understanding of what fascism is.
Try to think about when we communicated from as an educator level of just base education, what maybe hasn't been discussed yet. But yeah, glorification of violence, misogynistic. He didn't really talk about xenophobia as much. That's usually a factor as well. Fear of foreigners, outgroups, that kind of thing. Authoritarianism for sure. The state over the individual. Trying to think of any others. Usually it's anti-communistic from the stance of classless and international bringing down of the state internationally, which, you know, fascists are the opposite. They believe in the strengthening of the state, where communists believe in abolishing the state, okay, or progressing to a need where you don't have the state. That's what, you know, common communist ideology is supposed to take you. There's going to be no need for the state eventually.
But in honesty, this sounds like an objectively unenjoyable society. So how could it possibly have come to be?
Not if you're in the in-group.
Conditions could produce.
Not if you're in the in-group. It sounds like it's paradise
Sunday,
if you're in the in-group.
March 23rd, 1919. A group of 100 Italians gathered in the Milan Industrial and Commercial Alliance, led by Benito Mussolini. There, Mussolini formed his fascist organization. People often credit Mussolini with naming fascism on this day.
Fascismo. Interesting, Mussolini, different guy going into World War I and coming out. Going in, he was more of a like an anti-war, had like socialist sympathies. Then he came out of the war, like many people did, with a very different sense of identity and political theory, similar to Hitler. So many people, man, went into World War I and came out very different people.
But alongside him, similar groups were coming together all across Europe. Mussolini's idea was not unique.
Right.
The Great War had created strains on
fascist movement
existing
everywhere
institutions
after
simply
World War
could
I.
not solve. Indeed, this war was the most significant and immediate thing to fuel the rise of fascism. At the time, Europe was believed to be the most civilized part of the globe, so the idea of war breaking out, much less the brutality of the Great War, was simply unimaginable. When the Great War slaughtered an entire generation of men, people felt like European civilization was crumbling. By the time the war was over, it had wreaked such havoc that Europeans felt the old world was unsalvageable. Whatever promises Europe had of peace and prosperity were quickly forgotten. Meanwhile, they disagreed intensely about the future of this new world.
That's the difference.
For the Great War,
because it's like you could come out of World War I being like, all right, that was the war to end all wars. We learned our lesson. Time to end all of these things, the nationalism, the imperialism, the militarism. Or you could come out the other way and be the exact opposite, coming out of it and saying, no, we need to be stronger at those ism words, you know?
three political ideals were competing for influence over the globe.
Wilson,
Liberalism,
Clemens,
conservatism, and communism. Liberals
Lenin.
believed that each nation could basically determine their own fates and exist in harmony. Led in part by U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, they argued that no real external force would be needed for future peacekeeping. Conservatives were mostly silent, but believed that armed forces should continue to handle relations between nations.
And that was something that Wilson, coming out of World War I and his 14 points, was advocating against. He wanted reduction of arms because he thought, this is one of the things that led us to World War I, right? Militarism, the arms race, which I think he was right about.
And then there was the communist
wasn't keeping the world safe
installed by the Bolsheviks in Russia. Lenin wanted all nations to set democracy aside and adopt his ideology. He wanted nations to create temporary dictatorial parties to install this model into a worldwide communist society. None of these three parties had total success.
Stateless.
Wilson's liberalism came in the form of peace treaties that had been pushed into a conservative direction by other world powers. Liberals nor conservatives were ultimately satisfied with the result. Lenin's plan, meanwhile, was contained within Russia pretty quickly. And with all three ideas seeming to fail, there was room for a fourth.
That's true when you think about it. All of those were proven failures, I guess, leading up to the World War I, right? Or as a result of World War I. That's interesting to think about it as like, it wasn't just going to be liberalism, conservatism, or communism. There could actually be a third that might take aspects of all of them, and what your country or the leaders of it think will be the best aspects of maybe all three of those,
Anecdote, the words of Italian soldier Italo Balbo spoke to the climate in Europe after the war. When I returned home from the war, just like so many others, I hated politics and politicians who had betrayed the hopes of soldiers, reducing Italy to a shameless peace. I'd rather deny everything, destroy everything, to renew everything from the foundations.
That was the common feeling for soldiers everywhere, that they came home and realized that they went to a war over nothing, and they got nothing, and life was not better, and it was made worse, and that everyone that was responsible for that war should be considered like a criminal of some kind. They all thought that. Like, everybody came back. Nobody came back from the war like, woo, things are going to be great now. It was like exact opposite.
Balbo would later become Benito Mussolini's right-hand man in his fascist regime. Fascism promised to settle territorial conflicts by letting the strong prevail. Unlike conservatives,
there's your Darwinism, right?
Was not just military, but instead a combination of armed forces and national fervor. Liberals wanted to keep the peace through self-determination, but fascists didn't want to keep the peace at all.
This was addressing the long-term cause of World War I of basically imperialism. It was supposed to end imperialism, as imperialism being a cause of global conflict. Basically, a handful of nations have colonized the entire planet, and nationalist movements within those colonies are going to lead to more things that can start war, right? Like Bosnian Serbs assassinating the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, right? With nationalistic aspirations. And this was the liberal, of the time, the liberalist idea. This is one of the things that, for example, Wilson brought to a head. And this didn't occur, though. Okay. Well, self-determination happened amongst the countries that lost World War I, but not amongst those that won it, which is going to lead to other, wars later on, like, say, the Vietnam War,
They said that war would weed out the weak, allowing unified nations to have dominion over divided, irresolute, weaker nations. To Lenin's argument about class struggle, fascists said the true struggle was between the clean, genetically pure members of a united nation and those people of lesser, divided nations.
And there was a lot of lesser.
By eliminating the alien and impure, the people would be united together by their nationality. All of this came at just the right time.
You see this in Mein Kampf, like in Mein Kampf, where Hitler makes his break from Marxism, was on this idea of Marx talking about seeing people more by their social class, specifically in their economic class, where Hitler was like, no, we need to be seeing each other through racist lenses. To him, like, Marxism wasn't literally, he didn't think it was racist enough. Right. So you see this differentiation. There's these two different worldviews, seeing things through race and culture, and then one through economic class. And you could see where those things are going to start to diverge away from each other.
Fascism was not just a product of war, but also of unique cultural and intellectual circumstances.
Cultural
Liberty, reason, and harmony were some of fascism's greatest enemies.
Yeah.
Fascism was not the first to aggressively
fake
question these values.
a
At the
fascist.
time, there was a host of writers,
They're not real.
intellectuals, and academics that inspired Europe's early fascist movements. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche has been given the dubious title of being fascism's intellectual grandfather. On an emotional level, there's a
controversial, but yeah.
Nietzsche's writings carry a decidedly hard and even angry independence of spirit. God was dead, Christianity powerless, and science false. Nietzsche wrote about the
So
downfall of
pessimistic,
modern
nihilistic.
society, a downfall in which fascists would later find their rise. But more accurately, the thinker Georges Sorel was a tremendous influence on early fascists like Mussolini. Sorel wrote about the concept of a grand myth as a galvanizing idea that people could attach themselves to.
Speaking
This
of
myth, he
Mein
said, was so powerful that it could inspire people to perform well outside of their typical everyday duties. It could fuel revolutions, and remember, fascism is fundamentally revolutionary. Gustave Le Bon was an author who published The Crowd, a study of the popular mind, in 1895. In this book, Le Bon looks at how passions can fuel crowds to act irrationally and how crowd psychology makes large groups of people especially easy to manipulate. During this time,
Hermann Goering said that at the Nuremberg trials about, when asked about how to get the will of the people on your side, he said it's easy. All you got to do is tell them that they're being attacked, to give them an enemy that and to convince people that they are under attack. And once they do that, they could be bid to doing your will. Just tell them they're under attack, right? It doesn't matter who it is. Just tell them that. And people's natural defenses will come up and they will do what they believe is going to give them safety. So it's very easy.
politics were becoming more populist. The regular people were getting involved. So controlling these people, these crowds, could yield immense power. You could see how this would be
I mean, it's the end of monarchies
fascists.
too. The elite of the elites.
Freudian
That whole thing was
psychology
dying at
also
this time.
beginning to take hold in popular culture. This approach discussed how the subconscious can irrationally affect human behavior. This helped to undermine traditional liberal values that said people should simply choose, through reason, what policies were best for their own lives. But the fascists asked, if the human mind was subject to irrational action, how could liberal democracy ever be trusted?
So
Well,
taking down liberalism in its classical sense from a psychological point of view, saying why are we going to default to our irrationalities, which is what democracy is going to do. That's an interesting take on trying to justify anti-democracy.
Popular writers were beginning to rethink other traditional values like race and nation. Specifically, the idea of race became married to a more significant
Racial
biological
science.
meaning. Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin, stated that mankind had the power to improve the human race by encouraging only the best to reproduce. Galton, quite literally, invented the word eugenics. This set the framework for later ideas of master races, in which Aryans, who, by the way, aren't a real race, were somehow superior.
That's the mythology. But that kind of mythology, people love hearing that. I mean, think about it. If you get taught that you are descendants of a superior race, that like feels good to a lot of people. You know what I mean? So go with that. You roll with that. You could build and snowball a culture and a unity out of being told that you descend from greatness. People love being told that stuff, right?
Fear also played a significant role in setting the stage for fascism.
There you go.
There
Like I
was a
saying,
significant fear about the collapse of community. Urban sprawl began to set in. Immigration increased, and individualism became a more valued trait. In this new landscape, there was a feeling of purposeless drift, wherein people did nothing meaningful because they had no
Shows a
significant
dude
social
drifting.
ties to anyone or anything. No community. Immigration flourished. Ethnic minorities and cultural subversives were seen as a threat to national culture, to conformism, and again, to the already endangered idea of community. National culture.
tell them the other people that aren't you are trying to replace you, or they want, I mean, to replace you or of some kind, or take control over you. It's easy to get people defensive with that type of mindset.
Needed to be actively defended against these people. Unified nationalism would have seemed like a pretty good solution.
So here's the xenophobia thing.
There
I
was
was
also
wondering
a
if you'd
fear of
include.
decadence. Popular author Oswald Spengler argued that societies all had natural life cycles. He said that Europe was moving from a creative, amazing age of culture into an age of civilization, wherein people thought only of money. He advocated for a great revolution, hoping that some heroic Caesar-esque character would come save Germany and Europe. So you had a sharp change in the structure of politics, from elites only to mass participation. Then there were fears about the breakdown of community and national identity, as well as a cynicism about modern things.
It also sounds like the exact opposite of a lot of classical Western philosophy, especially like Greek philosophy, like Plato, for example. He believed in an elite class, that there is an elite class of, call them philosopher kings, that should rule and decide things on the behalf of society. Because I think he would also be one that would say there's this irrationality amongst people. So the most rational amongst us, the wisest, the most educated of us, should be, our elites. So it's interesting, like, that just came to mind, how that would be the opposite of like classical Greek philosophy.
However, to paint fascism as the direct result of some intellectual equation isn't really correct. I don't know that it's honest to selectively read back people's interpretations of society and say everything was pointing towards fascism. It does a disservice to the world at the time, and perhaps also the authors. By cherry-picking through Nietzsche or Sorel or Le Bon as precursors to fascism, these authors' works are seen incompletely, fragmented, and out of context.
Yeah, I was going to say, with the context there, a lot of these guys are just, of these people are doing predictions. They're seeing where things are at in, say, the 1800s, what's been going on with the Industrial Revolution and how that's changing society, the global imperialism of the 19th century, okay, the globalization that's it's really coming together, and making predictions that these are the things that seem to be naturally developing, right? And they're going to have different ideas, and maybe in certain places it's going to be this way or certain that way. That's like what Marx did. Marx was making a prediction within the context of the industrial capitalism that eventually the working class will seize the means of production from the bourgeoisie, which will eventually pave the way for a communist society, which is classless, moneyless, and stateless. But then you might have someone like Nietzsche or and these other guys that were saying, in a lot of ways, the opposite might happen. The extreme opposite of that might happen, where things become more national, more state controlled. You know what I mean?
Fascists who later cited these authors as inspiration were doing just that. You see, anti-fascists drew upon these people too. Nietzsche.
See, now I don't know, and help me out, guys. Okay, Hitler is obviously going to be influenced by maybe like Nietzsche or something like that. But a lot of these other philosophers, were Hitler and Mussolini really inspired by those guys? Like in the way that someone like Lenin or Ho Chi Minh or something was like devoutly reading Marxist theory, right? Were these guys doing that, or really kind of just developing on their own? I don't think so. I don't think so much that they were hitting that literature as much, but mostly highlighting, like for Hitler, his whole thing was learning about the highs of German history, the greatness of German past, and doing that, referencing Bismarck and stuff like that, rather than these political ideologies, but more looking at like history to push a narrative of some type of, I don't know if you call it a predisposition to what their beliefs are going to be, where these guys, again, hitting the books, like some of these other revolutionaries of other ideologies were. Not so much, you're going to see there.
From both sides of the political spectrum. His writings were not uniquely appealing to fascist sensibilities.
That's what we're saying.
Oswald
here.
Spengler, who wrote about the age of civilization, hated Hitler. The Nazis later drew on the work of the poet Stephen George, who wrote about a purified community of peasants led by an elite few. But one of George's closest students, Klaus von Stauffenberg, tried to assassinate Hitler in 1944. Cultural circumstances and the works of intellectuals gave fascism a place to exist, a room to live in. Right? But they did not bring it about. In reality, you can't paint a logical map towards fascism, because fascism simply isn't based in logic. No, it thrives almost entirely in emotion.
Interesting. Do you agree with that term? It's not about logic, it's about emotion. Now they're trying to make logical connections to it, like, connecting it to Freud, more about adhering to what natural laws maybe and human nature, like appealing to those things. But is it really just more of a tool to appeal to populism? That's interesting. Got to think about that. A recipe for fascism.
After escaping Nazi Germany, the historian
coming out of
George
hardship.
Mosse dedicated his life to finding the origins, the root causes of fascism. All of his years of research led him to this conclusion. Fascism does not come about through intellectual, societal, or cultural precursors. But
that's kind of what I was saying with the background for Hitler, say like Hitler and fascism is not coming from that background. That makes it different than maybe some other ideologies.
Something more amorphous, through mood. Mosse points to 9 mobilizing passions as the drivers of fascism, feelings within a society that build a foundation for the home of fascism. They are crisis, a sense of overwhelming crisis that traditional methods are entirely incapable of fixing.
Now, I would argue that every revolutionary, if you want to look at it, type of ideology all comes from crisis. That's definitely not unique to fascism. Look at like communism. All of the places where it came out of some kind of crisis. Whether it was an industrial crisis coming from runaway capitalism or a response to imperialism, like you're going to see and say like a Vietnam or something like that, or in response to a dictatorship like you saw in Cuba. I don't think that's going to be uniquely fascist.
Duty. The idea that an individual has duties to a group, duties that are superior in every way to every right any individual or group otherwise would have. Victimhood. The belief that one's group is a victim. This feeling
You're under
justifies
attack.
Virtually any action towards an enemy without any moral or legal limits. Decline. A feeling of a group's decline or fear of that decline due to individualism, liberalism, class conflict, or foreign influences. Community. The need for a closer, purer community by consent if possible, but also the feeling that violence is acceptable to create this community. Authority. The desire for authority by male leaders, leading to a single savior figure who is alone capable of bringing about a group's desires.
Yeah, you're Messiah.
Superiority. Feeling that this leader's instincts are superior to logic and reason.
Interesting.
Violence. An admiration for the violence
Looks like
and
he's
the efficacy
recapping.
of willpower as they relate to one group's desires.
Recapping everything he's been talking about.
And domination. The feeling that a chosen people have some biological right over another group of people.
That's where you're going to see too, and he hasn't mentioned that, this domination. Fascist states also will practice imperialism, right? Of taking over of new lands because they feel they're justified to it. The Lebensraum idea of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, that Germans as a superior people have the right to lands that people already exist on for the purpose of expanding their own racial desires and their own racial future. Look at Italy invading into Ethiopia or going into Albania or something like that. We see that it doesn't, it's like in a lot of ways you'd almost think that fascists would want to be isolationists, right? Because they feel that their people and their place has a superior place. But that's where you add to fascism like this level of superiority that surpasses wanting to be isolated from other people, but to like enslave, dominate, and conquer other people, and that you're justified in doing that.
Human or divine law should not infringe on that right. Together, these 9 feelings, Mosse wrote, would mobilize fascist movements in ways that logic alone could not explain. To look only at intellect, ironically, ignores the most powerful part of fascism as an ideology: feelings. Indeed, it is the feeling of fascism that has caused it to have such an enduring legacy.
Feels good to those that participate in it, right? The legacy.
For better or for worse, today we get so riled up in things resembling fascism that we recklessly throw the word around. And in a way, that is indeed a triumph of past
Doesn't that get
fascist
tiresome?
regimes. Fascism struck humanity harder than perhaps any modern political movement in terms of physical devastation
Because of World War
and
II,
spiritual imprint. So now, perhaps justifiably, we remain on high alert.
So you can see
But
his
the problem is
thesis there is really trying to advocate it. It sounds like he's saying it's been the most destructive force of what, the 21st century. Looks like he's about to wrap up. Do you think that's true? Do you think fascism has been the most destructive force in the 20th century?
everyone is a fascist. No one is a fascist. Personally fear that we are dangerously close to the word fascism losing its meaning entirely. And when that happens, the real fascists can disappear into the shadows, duck under the crossfire all too easily. They can sneak into power, exploiting our ignorance, and exploiting the same emotional groundwork as past fascist regimes have done. The monster of fascism is not dead, but the first step to killing it is learning what it looks like.
The problem is, I will tell you right now. Yeah, the problem is, even, after watching something like this, it's still going to be very hard to identify because it has so many features that are not uniquely fascist. And if something isn't unique in the way that it's portrayed or executed, it's going to be hard to identify that. That's why I think it's going to be harder to identify fascism than almost any other modern popular ideology. It's going to be harder to identify fascism more than socialism or communism or almost like democracy in a lot of ways, right? That's the problem there. And until I guess all the fascists can sit down and agree upon what fascism is, or have some kind of origin that everybody can go back to, we're probably going to continue to have this problem if it's the problem that he's saying it is, right? Which he says, he's saying here that it's, the biggest problem, basically, I guess you would say, in recent history. It's the thing that we should, fear the most. So I don't think it's too bad because we're sitting there talking about it, but how much are we learning from it to learn about this vast array of aspects that, again, in so many ways makes it harder to identify and easier to slip through the cracks? Or, like he was saying at the end there, the problem is if that term gets thrown around a lot, it's going to lose all its character. And like he was saying, fascists will be able to hide behind people that aren't really fascists, right? They'll be able to hide in the weeds or whatever there. It's like a boy who cried wolf, that eventually when fascism comes around, we'll no longer be able to identify it. So are we on a path to maybe identifying it better than we used to? Probably a lot more so than in the eras that was cited here, specifically with Italian and German fascism. But do we have enough yet to identify it quickly and to see it for what it is right now in our era right now? It almost seems like we're not there yet, in my opinion. So anyway, I'm interested to see what you guys have to say about this. We got a long video. I know I had a long video here. Thanks for staying with me. If you've stayed this long, I appreciate you doing this and hopefully taking a fascination with this and an honest, open-minded approach at trying to absorb these different ideas, to educate yourself and be willing to challenge your own preconceived notions, to hopefully come to a more logical truth, I guess, and something that we can identify more with these political ideologies. So thank you for that. This video will most assuredly be demonetized by YouTube. So thank you to everyone, especially that has been supporting my channel through things like channel memberships. That's one of the best things that you can, best ways that you can give back to this channel. Channel memberships are also here on YouTube going to give you a whole bunch of other features. You're going to get early access to videos. Basically, when I'm done editing a video and I upload it to YouTube, you'll be able to see it right away, even before the release time that I have. You can also support on Patreon. I know a lot of you prefer that. I don't have as many kickbacks right now to patrons, but it is a way that you can give back to the channel. They take a smaller cut than YouTube does and keeps my channel going and provides me the time to be able to again, watch more videos with you and give you my input. So with that, thanks again for being here. We'll see you all next time.